So I got a question in, and the question is asking why some spiritual teachers may reject or deny Kundalini or Kundalini awakenings. There are a variety of reasons for this. Some spiritual teachers may not have had a Kundalini awakening, and so they may not believe it's a reality, or they may just not have had the personal experience to speak about it. Some spiritual teachers are more focused on the destination or goal rather than the path getting there. And so we can consider that Kundalini awakenings are the path rather than the destination in that case. Some spiritual teachers may not be ready or may not feel it's wise to talk about their own Kundalini awakening or talk about Kundalini awakenings. There can be, maybe they aren't ready personally. They, don't want to discuss their personal experiences because Kundalini awakening in some regards can be likened to a traumatic experience, but it takes some time and the ability to look through the rear view mirror to be able to share any stressful or traumatic experience we've been through. In a lot of cases, I should say. Some people are ready right away, but some spiritual teachers may also not think that it's wise. There is a lot of thought about in some groups about what beginning students or even intermediate students, what sort of wisdom, what sort of guidance those groups should have versus advanced students. And so this is done with the best of intentions. And I do find that having a progressive curriculum or progressive understanding of things to be incredibly helpful. But I would also say we're living in a world where people can find advanced spiritual concepts all over. So in some regards, that sort of, concept of saving some teachings for later may sort of, collapse in on itself. I would say that a big reason that spiritual teachers may not talk about it is that in the field of spirituality and sort of esotericism, there are a lot of subjects to talk about, a lot of subjects to study. And Kundalini awakening takes a fair amount of study, a good deal of study, so years and decades of study to be able to understand it and be able to convey it or teach it to others. So some people may just not have that specialty, under the umbrella of spiritual awakening or, spiritual experiences. Kundalini awakening is under that umbrella. It's an important thing to understand, but some people may not have the depth of knowledge. I would say another big reason is that, and rightfully so, a lot of spiritual teachers may think that people, especially in the West, but really anywhere, um, are sort of grasping towards the word Kundalini or towards Kundalini experiences, not because they are having one, but because some aspect of their identity, some core wound within their self, needs that label for some reason. And so you can read my books, Working with Kundalini, Spiritual Awakening Guide, all that sort of stuff, where I talk about how Kundalini awakenings have specific criteria, specific experiences that people go through. And people may not have the depth of knowledge to be aware of this, or people may negate this entirely because, quite frankly, it can be sold quite readily. If you tell anybody that if they have an interest in spirituality or they're feeling some, basic energy flow in their body, that they're experiencing a Kundalini awakening, that you're going to have a bigger crowd than, saying that Kundalini is a very specific experience that has a very specific path and a very specific goal. So there are a fair amount of spiritual teachers that look at it as kind of creating more illusion or delusion for people and gear people away from that. not because Kundalini awakenings are not real, but that people, for varying reasons, may wish to identify with the experience, even if they are not having it. The last reason to really talk about is the what we consider awakening in the West. And so to start talking about this, I will share the myth of Narcissus. I won't go through the whole myth, but essentially the end part of it, which is that there was a maiden, Echo, who was in love with Narcissus, but he was too obsessed with himself to be able to give Echo any attention, any reciprocal energy, anything like that. And so his punishment from the gods was that when he went to the edge of a pond, he would notice his own image and become enraptured. And that's exactly what happened. He went to the edge of a pond, he saw his own image within the pond, and he became so obsessed that he basically withered and died and turned into the narcissus flower, because of this obsession with his own projected image. And so many of you may be familiar with the word narcissism, especially as it's popularly talked about, these days. But a good way to describe narcissism, and I promise I'm going somewhere with this, is that obsession with the projected image, obsession with that reflection, obsession with kind of the mask that we present to the world. And people who are clinically experiencing narcissism that should be diagnosed or are diagnosed put everything into that projected image. And that comes at a substantial cost. The inner self feels inferior, worthless. The soul sort of experiences loss. It sort of withers, because everything is put into that projection, that image in the pond. And so all of us, to some degree, before and during awakening, experience some degree of that narcissism, some degree of worry about how we are presenting ourselves to the world, wearing a mask out of fear, out of insecurity. There are a lot of reasons that go into it, but all of us, to some degree, present a false self, present sort of that ego-based defense mechanism, that ego-based need, that ego-based wounding to project an image that is different than how we are authentically feeling, how we are feeling within. In clinical narcissism, there is a complete divorce from inner feeling. The reason that I mention all of this is that a good deal of spirituality has to do with taking back that image from the pond, healing the thoughts, looking at desires to be spiritual, to have people see us in a particular way, the ways that we might be in competition with one another, the thoughts, bad or good, that we have regarding ourselves, all in an effort to heal the ego mind and to sort of release that image from the pond, to no longer have that reflection. In fact, there are steps to this in which we do that healing of thoughts, do that healing of the image, consider why it's there, and eventually we recognize it as an image, as a reflection, rather than a true reality. And so that is a very important part of the path, but it is kind of only half of it. And so I will say that a lot of people reject Kundalini awakening because they are rejecting the feminine. They are rejecting the self with a capital S. And so in the body, we can consider that we have two polarities. One polarity is the head, so the crown. This is the masculine polarity. It has to do with thought, it has to do with order, it has to do with doing or activation energy in the world. And then we have the feminine polarity in the genitals, but really the feminine has to do with the body, it has to do with the self, who we authentically are. Who are we once we individuate? What do we think when we take away, worry about what other people think? What happens when we, truly come into a place of understanding who we as individuals are? The body is also the domain of feeling, the feeling self, experiencing emotions, experiencing embodied spirituality, sexuality, feeling, intuition, creative flow, life force. All of these are a result of the body waking up. And so without recognizing it, a lot of us are blind to the fact that a lot of religious and spiritual paths are still incredibly patriarchal. They revere the masculine and they dismiss or deny the feminine. We can see this in philosophies as well, where the head and the body are separate, representing our separation from nature, representing our separation from our own nature. And so a lot of people dismiss or reject Kundalini awakenings because Kundalini is awakening of the feminine polarity. Initially, we may refer to it as a goddess or refer to it as the awakening of the feminine polarity, awakening of the creative potential, awakening of the body consciousness, and having that energy flow through the body, which is a very physical, embodied, sensate, emotional experience. We process all of our past trauma. We get into a space of emotional intelligence with all our feelings to the point where they can just sort of flow through us. And eventually, the feminine polarity and Kundalini awakening meets the masculine polarity, combines, and then moves out of dual or binary existence because they're combined. They are one instead of two. And so I would argue that a lot of the sort of spirituality that comes to the West, a lot of the spirituality that people come upon out there, and I am going to pick on the modern sort of non-dual movement for a moment because it most highlights this, but there are a lot of other spiritualities out there that kind of show our disconnection from ourselves, show our dismissal and rejection of the feminine, of the nature, of our nature, of ourselves, of the feeling aspects of our being. And so I will say that the experience of emptiness can be achieved from a head-based place. But I would say that there is no true awakening without the body. If we awaken from a head-only place, we are only awakening the masculine principle within ourselves. And so we are missing out on a large chunk of our awakening. We are only having a partial awakening experience. And so I do find a lot of people that are, they have a lot of top-down awakening, a lot of, they've kind of worked through a lot of their thoughts or that reflection. Maybe they've experienced some expression of like no self or stream entry or whatever they want to call it, but they are not having an embodied experience. They're still, if you are experiencing emptiness, that is still a part of binary reality. If we're going to get very esoteric for a moment, I will say that if we experience emptiness and fullness simultaneously, dark and light, feminine and masculine, if we experience all of those dichotomies, all of those paradoxes as one, that is where awakening can truly lead us. And that only happens if we awaken through the body, if that feminine and masculine polarity combine as one. I will share as one last thing that Ramana Maharshi is really thought of as like kind of the grandfather of the non-dual movement. And even in his spirituality, he came to an understanding that it is the spiritual heart that is the end of the spiritual path. So it is embodied faith, embodied feeling, embodied expression of the divine flowing through our bodies, flowing through our being. And so this only happens if we awaken up here, sure, but if that awakening descends as grace, as flow into our heart space, and our hearts, our spiritual hearts, you can look at my video on this, truly start to awaken, truly start to feel kind of the divine pulsation, the creative energy, the creative flow of the feminine, pairing with the masculine. And I will share that there is no ecstasy, there is no life force, there is no enthusiasm and expression of the self without the body awakening. And so every bit of ecstasy that we experience, every bit of bliss, every bit of, complete stillness that we experience is an embodied stillness. It cannot be head only stillness. If our heads awaken, we may have a lot of thoughts, we may have a lot of interesting ideas, we may have seen or experienced a lot when it comes to spirituality. But without that embodied experience, without the heart, without the feminine polarity, we still have a ways to go. And so the TLDR version that I will leave you with is that a lot of spiritualities and spiritual paths are still very much in denial or seek to repress, seek to deny, seek to suppress the feminine. And until we come to a place where we can revere all aspects of ourselves, we are missing out on a large part of our nature. If we do not awaken the feminine within ourselves, we are only awakening half of ourselves, if that. So I will leave things there. Hopefully that provides good food for thought. If you have a question, feel free to ask below.